Hi there, and thank you for tuning in to the Social Circus, where every week we dive into a variety of topics covering social media, mindset, and how to run your business. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. Hello, my lovely listeners, and welcome to another episode of the Social Circus. I am your host each and every week, Sarah Thomson, and today I have a very special guest. Her name is Emily Fogg, and she is the owner and founder of Wise Our Tuition. Welcome, Emily.
Hi, thanks for having me on, Sarah.
My pleasure. I'm so excited for our chat today. Would you like to tell my lovely listeners a little bit about yourself and your business as it stands?
Yeah, so I was a teacher for 15 years, and after returning from maternity leave, I decided to start my own business, which is Wise Our Tuition. I knew that there was a real need for a tutoring service that could provide quality intervention for kids with learning difficulties, like things like dyslexia, ADHD. There's a whole bunch of others like dysgraphia, dyscalculia. And I just knew that those kids were just getting left behind at school. And as a classroom teacher, you know that you can't do everything that you need to for everyone. So I really wanted to create a quality service that was available in our community.
Amazing. And we are now 3-4 years later, and you now have a really successful tutoring business with very in demand for your services. And I love that you have created this space out of a gap that kind of existed in the market, which is often where we head with our businesses, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I know that right now, for my listeners, Emily is actually pregnant. So she's kind of in a state of flux with her business, which is really interesting. But what we're going to be talking about today, because Emily has such a broad range of experience in working with people who are neurodiverse, that we're going to dive in and talk a little bit about that for my listeners, because I think that it's really important for us to understand how we as business owners can help and support all of our community and the wider people like our fans on our following and things like that. So we might start with the obvious question, Emily, because it's a term we hear or use all the time, like neurodiverse, neurodivergent. And I'm not even sure if I completely understand it, even though I live in a very diverse family. So do you want to start and give me some definitions and explain what it includes and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so when we talk about neurodiverse or people who are neurodivergent, what we're meaning is that their brain is slightly different to what we call people who are neurotypical. And that can encompass so many things. It's a really broad, like an umbrella term, and there's so many different diagnoses that sit under that umbrella. So things like bipolar disorder, dyslexia, autism, ADHD, they all sit under that umbrella of neurodiversity.
Mm-hmm. And for us as business owners, because I think what we always want to do is we want to be inclusive and we want to speak to our audience in a way that helps and supports them. So as a first question, is it okay to ask our audience those kind of questions and ask them to share it? And how do you feel about that?
I think it's becoming much more accepted, and I think there's much more of a push to be open about if you do have a diagnosis. So I think it's okay to ask, and people only respond if they want to, right? And I think a lot of people are quite proud of their neurodiversity too.
Yes, and I do agree with you, Emily, because it's something that we've definitely seen change over the last decade. I think I have a family, my husband has ADHD and autism, and when he was first diagnosed, we didn't really talk about it. And because we ran a business, we used to keep it very much to ourselves. And I now feel, even in myself, we're much more accepting of speaking about these things. And it makes me really happy to see us talking about it so much. So are you happy to share a little bit about your journey? Because I know you've had a recent diagnosis too.
Yes. So I have just been diagnosed a couple of months ago with inattentive ADHD. And while I had suspected through my work that, a lot of these things really describe me, it was a big shock. So I'm still kind of getting used to it. But as I've done a lot of more research into women and ADHD and not necessarily children, I've realized that over the years I have scaffolded myself a lot in the things that I do and the routines I just have at home. And it's been really good to find out, because it explains why you are the way you are. And, I'm never going to have a Pinterest-worthy household.
Yes.
I'm quite messy. And, you know, that's just one tiny little aspect of having ADHD, but it definitely helps you to accept yourself the way that you are.
Yes. And
Yeah.
I think, you know, once you get a diagnosis, this is certainly the case in my family, just knowing what is the label and what does that mean and how do we apply that? We're already kind of living our life, like you say. It explained a lot of things that you've already existed in your home that you're like, oh, that all makes sense now. Like it's kind of like connecting the dots a little bit. And I know from my audience, I see so many women that are like as full-fledged adults getting diagnosed. We call it a late in life diagnosis. And that makes me really excited because I think a lot of people, I see people saying it's really on trend to have ADHD. And I'm like, it's not. We just have better diagnostic tools and we actually talk about it. So now the people who've been walking around like yourself, existing in a world kind of, like you say, scaffolding and creating all these structures that supported you, now can kind of go, oh, I understand what's going on.
Yeah, it's really nice. I always thought I was lazy, even though on one flip side, I knew I wasn't lazy. But compared to like when I was growing up, my mum, their house was like a display home and everything was always perfect. And I've never been able to achieve that. And you know what mums are like when they come to visit, right? They go, oh, you know, like, why haven't you done this and why haven't you done that? And I just always felt like I was lazy because I wasn't doing these things. But now I just realized that my ADHD brain doesn't even see it. It's not even an issue to me. So,
oh, I know. I realize this with my husband now. I have to have very prescriptive lists. And my favorite, which I do when I'm really grumpy, is I plunk the washing in the basket wet in the middle of the lounge room floor. And I see how long it takes for someone to notice it. And my husband will not notice it ever. And it's not that he's being belligerent or it's just the way his brain is wired. And we've been together 20 years, so I'm pretty good with it now. But it's really having that acceptance around yourself and that awareness, isn't it?
Yeah. I think it's really good. So I think, I highly encourage anyone, if they do suspect that they maybe have ADHD or anything else, to go and find out, because it's definitely been a bit of a journey. And because it's only just recently happened, I still haven't decided if I'm going to go down the medication route or what I'm going to do. But it's just nice to know, although it was a bit of a shock.
Yeah, I'm sure. And probably in your own head, allow you to, like you say, stop calling yourself lazy, stop putting those labels on yourself that are really judgmental, because that's what we think the outside world sees. So we can kind of be kinder.
Yeah.
Oh, and I love hearing that you've got that compassion for yourself as well. It's important, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so good. And I definitely highly recommend a book, which I think I've got behind me. It's called The Year I Met My Brain, and it's about a journalist who was diagnosed with ADHD later in life. And it's so good. It's such a good, I read it in a weekend after my diagnosis.
Oh, wow.
It's got so much, it's well researched, but she just, gives so much information in there. So I highly recommend that book to anyone.
Amazing.
Have a family member with neurodiversity, or if you're thinking maybe yourself as well.
Amazing. Thank you. I'll make sure I pop a link for the listeners into the show notes so you can go and look up that book and grab it. I love a good book, so I'm going to go check it out myself. So when we talk about running a business with ADHD, because from the outside looking in, you're incredibly successful. You run this amazing business. You have, let's be honest, lots of structure because you have to see students in very specific times and you have to be really, really well organized. And so you've obviously created amazing systems for yourself that have supported you to run a successful business.
Yeah. And I think being like my career before I started the business, being a teacher, you have to be really organized and you have to have, everything's broken down into blocks of time. So I was used to working that way. And used to having lots of routines and structures in place. So I kind of applied my classroom life to my business, and that's how I created it. It definitely took me a while to find some good systems with, the admin side of things. And that's probably the first thing I outsourced was a bookkeeper, because I'm still not, still my struggle. But I got a bookkeeper really quickly. So I kind of recognized what were my strengths and what wasn't.
Yeah.
Made sure I had really good scheduling tools and really good systems in place. So every Monday would be my day that I prep for the whole week, and I'd make sure I have the whole week's worth of lessons organised. And lots of systems and routines. So I had to as much as like my ADHD brain is like, oh, routine is boring, but it really kept me organized and kept things running smoothly.
Yeah. And now that you, because obviously your specialization is working with children who are neurodivergent. And so you obviously really understand, you must have had such a nice understanding of supporting them. So as a business owner, because obviously I hear it talked about a lot, and I feel like sometimes it's a bit hard. It makes it harder on people who are neurodivergent. When people say, oh, ADHD is like a superpower. And I'm like, parts of it 100% are. And I work with my husband, and there are parts of it, like he has hyperfocus so well. Getting him to sit at the desk to hyperfocus is a challenge.
Yeah.
So what do you reckon, like you said, you've worked out what are not your happy places like bookkeeping and things. So for people who are listening to the podcast who might be neurodivergent, what would be your advice to help them run a business more easily? That was terrible English, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I would say work out what are your strengths and weaknesses. Like, what are the tasks that you're avoiding? So I find that that's what I do. I just kind of like push it to the side. And so I would sit down and maybe make a list. Probably, I think the thing that helps me was I've always had a business coach since I've been in business. So Sarah's my business coach, and I had another person before her, and that really helped me stay on track and find out the things that do help all business owners.
Yeah.
Be organized and productive and those kinds of things. So really creating those routines and focusing on what needs to be done, like making a list. I might make a list every day, my 3 top things that have to get done, and do those first. And I'd often do the thing that's the hardest or that I don't want to do first, so that gets done. And then I have my other things that I can work on.
I love that. And I think that, that would probably apply to all of us, because whether we're neurodivergent or not, there's still tasks we procrastinate on. And I'm a bit disciplined in that. I always make myself do the thing I don't want to do least. And then when I get to another task, I'm like, oh, I've almost like a little reward system for myself. It's funny how we treat our little brains and what we do with them, and how we decide what we're going to do and not going to do. But and on the flip side of that, and I've certainly watched my husband do this a lot, is to lean into how you feel. In terms of, if it's just not working today, don't push and force yourself. And I think that's something that it's really hard to address when you're a business owner, because things have to be done. So is that something you bring into your business at all?
Yeah, I do. So especially with things that aren't really time, like I can do it anytime. So I write a lot of blogs for my business, and my social media and things, I'll do it at a time when I'm really feeling it. Not at a time where I just force myself to do it, because then it's just 10 times harder. And I do find that I have that hyper focus, and, I'll sit up to midnight writing a blog post, and I'll forget that,
wow,
I haven't even had dinner. But if you asked me to do that at some other time of the day, I would sit there and not be able to do it. Like, I just wouldn't have that flow. So I find, just those tasks that you can put to the side, work on them when you are in that state that you can be creative and you feel like you're really ready to sit down and do that activity.
I love that. And it's something I've definitely embraced that over the years of being in business, realizing there are times when I want to do something and there are times when I'm not. And if I pay attention to that, it all becomes easier. Rather than going, you're going to sit down and do this today, and I sit down, I'm like, I don't want to do it. And we become like belligerent little children then, and we don't want to do it, and we just procrastinate. Yeah. So I love that as advice. Now, let's talk a little bit about working with neurodivergent people, and how do we bring in some inclusivity into it? Because I know that every time we pop onto Insta, there is lots of talk about how do we make things more inclusive. And I think I could probably speak to every single listener and say that we all want to do that, but we don't know how to approach it. So if you can share a couple of tips. First of all, let's talk about our social media and the way in which we create content, and how can we make that more appealing and more inclusive would be a great place to start.
Yeah, so definitely to be more inclusive, you need to be including alt text in your pictures. That helps people who have a screen reader be able to work out what it is that you're actually posting. And that's not necessarily for people who are neurodivergent, but that's just something that I've learned along the way. I do think making it interesting, which works for, for everybody, but particularly for people who are neurodivergent, if it's not capturing your attention straight away, then we're just going to scroll past. So probably making sure it's really snappy, really interesting, and repeating your messages, I think, which obviously is another marketing tool as well. But that works.
And we can forget easily, though, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think with neurodivergent people, we forget things, you know, like, and I love, like Sarah, how, you know, we put this podcast in, but you've sent me several reminders because otherwise I would forget. And yes, it's in my calendar, but I would still probably forget. So I think definitely having those systems where you're repeating your messages and sending lots of emails about the same thing, or lots of reminders, making sure you've got a booking system with a calendar that sends it to their calendar. It sends them reminders automatically. Those kinds of things are a lifesaver. Like, I don't know, I'm kind of going off topic away from our social media here.
That's okay. We're all good. We're enjoying it. It's fine.
Yeah. So I think I know that those things if people didn't do that, I would not turn up. And, you know, like, or I'll double book myself, and it's not because I'm not invested in what it is that I've booked with them, or that I don't think it's important. It's just that's just how my brain works.
Yeah. And I think that's another really interesting thing, because I, and shout out to Carly, who's in the mastermind with us ladies here. She calls a lot, like the ADHD, the neurosparkly, which I love as a description. I think it's so fun. And I seem to attract a lot of neurosparkly clients, which I love. And one of the things that she talked about is having a safe space to lean into whatever's going on with what you have going on at the time. So some days you can't show up and you can't feel it, and allowing clients to move things or be flexible is something that I've really worked hard to build into my business. It's not something I love because I like order and I like predictability in my business, but it's something that I've realized that people will show up and they just can't do today. And that's something I've had to learn. It's taken me a while, I'm being a slow learner in that, to realize that it doesn't matter if you made a commitment. It doesn't matter if you know that I'm a busy lady. If you're just not there, you and I are not going to have any sort of productive session. And that's really hard.
Yeah, it is hard. And it's harder from the perspective as a business owner as well, because, you know, you've obviously got the things that you need to get done and those kinds of things. But I think it's really great if you can be flexible and allowing people those times to move things when they really need to. And find a way to be compassionate for that.
Yeah, and that's something I've definitely learned the more I work with you neurosparkly ladies, that I can see when people show up, I'm like, are you able to do today's session? And I'll often ask them that, and they're like, I'm all over the place and I'm chaotic and I can't concentrate. It's something and I see this happens with my husband. Something happens outside of work that throws you off your day and completely diverts and distracts you, and you literally can't work. And that's something I like a few years ago, it would have been so rigid. I'm like, bad luck if you don't show up, you lose your session. This is not how I work. And now I realize that that's actually just really mean, and it's not supportive or inclusive.
Yeah. I think that's really lovely that you do that. There's a lot of places wouldn't. And it's the same with my tutoring. Like, kids obviously come sometimes and they're not really in the headspace to be doing tutoring. So we'll make sure, even though we'll usually still do the session, we'll make sure it's more fun and take it, you know, just have a gentler session rather than pushing through with something that's really difficult.
Yeah. And with us working in groups with neurodivergent people, that can be a really big challenge, because different people's neurodiversity shows up in different ways. So some people are very heavy oversharers. Some people get really intimidated and overwhelmed and like kind of retreat into their little shell if the group's too big. So as someone because I often facilitate training and it's got, 30 or 50 people in it, how do we help and support people who might be in there and they're just not getting what they need? What could we do as little tips to help them along the way?
I think it's always nice to, when you do have a big training session with a lot of people, to have times where they break off into smaller groups, or you're able to go around to smaller groups of people and talk to them individually. Obviously, you can't do one-on-ones with everyone, but I think it's nice to be able to just go and approach a smaller group, especially if you notice that, a few people aren't really speaking up or engaging, or, you notice that they're very quiet, to go and check on them and just ask them if they want more help, or if they have any questions. Sometimes it's nice some people don't want to speak in front of everyone. So even if they could like write a question on a piece of paper and you could, pick it out of a hat or something like that, work well. And yeah, just those loud people that do tend to dominate conversations. Sometimes you need to work out a nice way of kind of letting them allow other people to speak as well.
Yeah, and that's our skill as facilitators and trainers, is managing all those things. But something I definitely learned when we moved through COVID and we went to online training, I realized that people, when you're in a room, there's a different feeling to when you're online, because online you can't see everyone else in the room and people tend to get more nervous. And so I always invite people, if they have a question, to private message me through the Zoom. And it's so interesting now, when I always say that at the beginning of my workshop, throughout there, so many people will start private messaging me and I'll read out their question. And then as the time goes on, I notice then they feel like, oh, she's making me feel safe. And so then they actually verbally ask questions. So it's interesting if you give people that space and they start to feel comfortable, that they actually will then step forward and speak, even though they weren't intending to do that. And that's something I've noticed is a big change in the way in which I train.
Yeah, I think that's so lovely. A lot of people feel embarrassed to ask questions, like they think they should already know the answer.
I know. And I think for anybody, whether you're neurodivergent or not, I know, I was just telling Emily before you got on the podcast, I had a session with someone this morning. They were coaching me and it was really uncomfortable and I felt very exposed and vulnerable. And it's really good to step into that space if you're a coach, because it reminds you that's how your clients feel a lot of the time. And to remind you that our job is really to nurture and care for people, but help them to grow. And it's all really hard human emotions. Like a lot of us think running a business is about your business. It's actually about you, isn't it? It's so much about your stuff.
It is, yeah. It's so much about you as a person.
How we show up, how we behave, how we or don't show up, and all the things that we do. It's so complicated. But from your perspective, in terms of moving forward with your recent diagnosis, how do you think, because I know that your goal is to have some online courses, and I know that you've got some exciting products coming, but has that been something you've really wanted to include in your business so that allows you to have more of that space? Because at the moment you're very high touch with your clients, aren't you?
Yeah. I've found, particularly beginning of this year, I had so many clients, and yeah, sometimes I just need to not people, right? And as much as I love working with them, sometimes, I do, it's 5 days pretty much full time of lessons, and that is a lot. And I've sort of set up the business so it is like a classroom, it is like school, without realizing that it is a business and I have all the other things I need to do as well. So I did find that could be a bit much at times. Yes. But yeah, I've got a reading course that is out at the moment, which is a course for parents to help their child learn to read, which is really great if you have children in, kindy up to about year 3. Yeah. And then, I've got a bunch. I am creating my own decodable readers at the moment, which are really important tools for helping children learn to read. And I just haven't been able to find enough of the ones that are suitable, so I'm writing my own. So
I wasn't sure if I can mention the decodable readers because I'm so excited about those. Having, obviously my boys are almost grown up now, but that early stage, and as a parent, you're so wanting to help nurture your child, to help them to read and support them. And there is a lack of great tools out there. So I'm really excited for your readers to come out. And I know if you have children in that kind of, children under 8 years of age, they're going to be incredibly helpful for them. But from your perspective, that's going to really give you that space to not people and to not feel like you have to show up all the time, which again, you creating those is actually showing yourself lots of self-compassion, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I do really enjoy creating digital products and doing all of that side of things as well. As much as I do enjoy tutoring and I do enjoy being with the kids. The amounts that I was doing, it was probably too much. I think I need to hire someone else to help out with that.
I think on that note, Emily, we might wrap it up because I'm mindful of my time. And I love that you shared some amazing tips with my listeners on how we can better help and support our audience of neurodivergent, sparkly people. And I'm really excited to share when your decodable readers come out. I can't wait for those. But I'll also put in the links of the show notes to your reading course, which is currently available. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you so much for your time and your honesty today. I truly appreciate it. I think it's really important. The more we talk about these things, the more we bring it into everyone's awareness, and it just becomes normalizing it and makes everyone feel more comfortable. So thank you so much for being a wonderful guest on my podcast today, Emily.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for having me on.
My absolute pleasure. And to all my lovely listeners, I hope you've learnt lots today from Emily. It's certainly my intention over the next few months, I'm going to be sharing some more information on inclusivity and diversity. So watch this space for those upcoming episodes. But thank you again for listening to the Social Circus. I hope you have enjoyed today's episode, and I'll catch you the same time next week. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Social Circus. As your host, Sarah Thomson, I am thrilled that you've chosen to spend your time hanging out with me. I would be so grateful if you could spare an extra moment to go and leave me a review on your favourite podcasting platform. And if you even felt more excited, you could share my podcast with your friends who you think would get great value from it. Thanks so much again for tuning in.